Hello guys. So let's get into the descriptive questions of ICAI intermediate mock test papers. So first question. There are practical and legal limitations on the auditor's ability to obtain audit evidence. Explain with the help of examples. So whenever there is a question, whenever there is a statement like this, first agree on the question. They're making a statement because they are all learned people. So first of all, right, yes, there are practical and legal limitations on the auditor's ability to obtain audit evidence. Just imagine, no, you're going for an audit, people are not giving you any sort of documentation, any sort of evidence for you to obtain. There's no sufficient and appropriate evidence for you to address your points, to vouch for each and every observation that you're giving. So what all could be the different situations in which you might get into a fix like this? One, when the management, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is not ready to give you information. Okay, so the possibility of management not providing complete information, whether intentionally or unintentionally. This is situation number one. Situation number two, most of the auditor's audit procedures are addressed or to gather audit evidence and to address or detect the errors, that is the unintentional errors that could land up in the financial statements. So if there is a fraud is an intentional act to conceal facts or to wrongdo things. That's a fraud. In case of fraud, the audit procedures that you perform to gather audit evidence might prove to be ineffective to detect these intentional misstatements which are there in your financial statements. So point number two is fraud. Point number three, audit is not an official investigation into alleged wrongdoing. So it's not a case where you are a CBI officer, you are given specific legal powers to go for a search, to go for a seizure, you are given a warrant, come on, do investigation. It's not like that. You see the financial statements, whatever is there in the financial statements, you try to vouch for it. You try to take all the assertions of the management and you vouch for all that assertions. How do you vouch? You gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence for all that. You take an understanding of it and then you give a reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatements, whether arising from fraud or error. So that is all you can do. So the third point is you're not given any special or specific legal powers to conduct any search or warrant, or you're not given any warrant or seizure or investigation. Audit is not an official investigation of alleged wrongdoing. So these are the 3 points which put an effect on auditor's ability, which put a doubt on auditor's ability to obtain audit evidence. Point number one, possibility of management not providing complete information, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Point number two, in case of fraud, the audit procedures that you perform to gather audit evidence might prove to be ineffective to detect the intentional misstatements which are forming part of the financial statements on account of fraud. Point number three, an auditor is not given specific legal powers to conduct search or investigation or seizure. In precise, audit is not an official investigation into alleged wrongdoing. Okay, jumping on to the next question. DEF & Co. Chartered Accountants successfully carried out the audit of Shree Garments for the financial year 1920. After the completion of the audit, they found found material misstatements due to fraud in the financial statements, which were not noticed and reported by the auditor. Management alleges that it is a failure on the part of the auditor. You always need to remember that management is paying you high fees. It is paying you fees. For all the fees that management is paying the auditors, they want to blame the auditors for all the fraud or error, whatever is arising in the financial statements, even after the audit period. Even after your audit procedure is done, then they want to complain you for all the alleged wrongdoing or fraud or errors which are arising in the financial statements. This is natural. So first of all, we need to understand that there are certain inherent limitations of audit, because of which there is unavoidable risk of material misstatements, there is unavoidable risk that the material misstatements, whether arising due to fraud or error, may go undetected, even though the audit is properly planned and performed in accordance with the standards of auditing. And subsequent discovery of material misstatement of financial statements due to fraud or error, it does not mean that the audit was not properly planned or was not properly performed in line with essays. So this is the prefix. This you need to first of all understand. This is a disclaimer that we are giving to the entire audit function. But if there is a fraud and you need to prove that there is no mistake on your part, you did your job well, what all as an auditor will you do to save yourself from this situation? First of all, you need to show them the sufficiency of audit evidence obtained, the adequacy of audit evidence that you have obtained, the appropriateness of the audit evidence that you have obtained, and the suitability of auditor's report based on the audit evidence that you have obtained. So first of all, you need to prove them that there was adequate audit evidence which was obtained, sufficient audit evidence was obtained, appropriate audit evidence was obtained, and my report, the auditor's report which I am giving, is properly based on the audit evidence which was obtained. The suitability of the auditor's report on the audit based on the audit evidence obtained in the light of the overall objectives of the auditor. If you can prove this, if you can properly document this and prove this and give it to the management, then it is going to be a case where you, even if there is a subsequent discovery of fraud or error in the financial statements, you can prove that the audit was properly planned and performed in accordance with SAs, but because of the inherent limitations of audit, there is always this unavoidable risk that the material misstatements on account of fraud or error which are arising in the financial statements might go undetected by the audit process, even though the audit is properly planned and performed in accordance with SAs. Let's jump into the next question. There are two interlinked perspectives of independence of auditors. One, independence of mind, and two, independence in appearance. Explain. So when there is some clear statement like this has to come from some body, some authority. So who is that authority? As per the Code of Ethics for Professional Accountants issued by the International Federation of Accountants, please write this exactly and clearly. As per the Code of Ethics for Professional Accountants issued by the International Federation of Accountants, independence includes two perspectives. One is independence of mind and the other one is independence in appearance. What is independence of mind? Independence of mind is that state of mind that permits provision of an opinion. So it is that state of mind which is permitting you to provide an opinion without being affected by influences. You're not getting affected by anything. Okay, the director of this company is a close friend of one of my close relatives. The woman director in this company is a close friend to my wife in one way. You're not getting influenced by all this. You're able to give an opinion without getting affected by influences, thereby allowing an individual to act with integrity, exercise objectivity and professional skepticism. It is that state of mind that permits a person to provide an opinion without being affected by influences, thereby allowing the individual to act with integrity, exercise objectivity and professional skepticism. What is independence in appearance? Independence in appearance is the avoidance of facts and circumstances that are so significant that a third party would reasonably conclude that an auditor's integrity, objectivity or professional skepticism had been compromised. Say for example, you're moving with the executive director and the other directors of the company, the board of directors of the company. They are giving you some 10 lakh rupees lump sum in cash for some reason. So the person who's seeing this from outside, what will he think? Okay, this auditor, okay, they're all same set of people only. They're all partners only in some sense, it seems. So the auditor's integrity, objectivity, all this, okay. I mean, because he's getting money from them, there might not be any independence. This is what a third party could conceive. So what is independence in appearance? Independence in appearance is you are avoiding all the facts and circumstances that would reasonably cause a third party to conclude that the auditor's integrity, objectivity and professional skepticism had been compromised. So this is the solution on independence of mind and independence in appearance. Next one. Professional judgment is essential to the proper conduct of an audit. Okay. When you're talking of professional judgment, the easiest way to remember this is the difference between you and your partner. That is your principal, the principal of your firm. You being an article, you'll have a very a very novice, a very basic, fundamental professional judgment. Whereas as an auditor with loads of experience, tons of years of experience at his back, he would have some amazing professional judgment to his credit. So what is the difference that your partner, your principal brings into the table? That's what you need to remember for this answer. First, he'd be in a position to interpret the relevant ethical requirements, the standards on auditing, and to take informed decisions throughout the audit. So point number one. Point number two, he'll be able to tell you what is material in the audit and what is the audit risk. Even before you go to the audit, he'll be able to tell you, hey, look into this area, man. This area is very critical. And look into all the transactions with this vendor, because this vendor, I've known that this vendor gets into bogus transactions on and off. So look into all the transactions with this vendor, especially pick many samples from this vendor. And look into this area, this stock area you look into, this debtors area, especially this case you look into. All this your auditor, your partner will be able to say. So the materiality as to what is important and the audit risk. These are the risky areas of the audit. Third point, he'll be able to tell you the nature, timing and extent of audit procedures to be performed to meet the standards on auditing requirements and to gather audit evidence. So he'll be able to tell you the NTE of audit procedures. Similarly, once after audit procedures are performed, he'll be able to tell you whether sufficient and appropriate audit evidence has been gathered or not. So that also he'll be in a position to tell you. Next comes to a situation where you are telling your partner, sir, this management is telling that this particular Ind AS is not applicable to them. So can you just tell me whether this is applicable to them, sir? Or for this particular transaction alone, they are saying that US GAAP is not applicable for them. Can you just tell me whether this is applicable for them? So what he'll do, he'll typically take a book or he'll open a new tab in a system. He'll get into all the statutes. He'll look into the provisions. He'll then be able to, in a position to advise you that, okay, management's judgment in this case is right, in this case is wrong. No, you quote them that this provision, as per this provision, this is right, this is wrong. So he'll be in a position to evaluate the management's judgment in applying the entity's applicable financial reporting framework. And the last point, drawing of conclusions based on audit evidence obtained. So whatever audit evidence that you obtain and give it to him, he'll be in a better position to draw conclusions based on that. He'll be able to tell you, okay, this is a qualification. For this point, we need to qualify the report. This you specifically put it in emphasis of matter paragraph. This you specifically put it in other matters paragraph. Okay, this we'll have to qualify in CARO. All this he'll be able to tell you. So in professional judgment, why it is essential for overall conduct of audit? Point number one, interpretation of relevant ethical requirements, essays, and to take informed decisions throughout the audit. Point number two, to determine materiality and audit risk. Point number three, NTE, to determine nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures to be performed, to meet essay requirements, and to gather audit evidence. Point number four, whether sufficient and appropriate audit evidence has been gathered throughout the audit. Point number five, evaluation of management's judgment in applying the entity's applicable financial reporting framework, FRF. And the last point, drawing of conclusions based on audit evidence obtained. Now into the next question. The auditor has to make inquiries on certain matters under section 143 subsection 1 of Companies Act. What are those matters? These matters are 6 things. 2 things relating to loans and advances, 1 relating to accounting, 1 relating to shares, debentures and other securities, 1 relating to personal expenses and 1 relating to share allotment. Point number 1, loans and advances. The loans and advances made by the company on the basis of security. In these cases, first check whether it is properly secured. 2, whether the terms and conditions are prejudicial to the company's interest. For example, your company is giving a loan to some other company on certain terms and conditions, and that other company is giving a part of its land or it's creating a charge against some of its assets. So this is a loan and advance which is advanced by your company on the basis of security. Here you need to check whether it is properly secured. The security that they have given, whether it is adequate and whether it is sufficient and whether it is appropriate. Point number 2, you need to check whether the terms and conditions of this loan or advance that you have given, whether it is prejudicial to the company's interest, whether it is affecting the company's or negatively impacting the company's interest in any way. Point number 2, accounting. Transactions accounted by the company which are merely represented by book entries. These entries they'll usually pass, all these book entries they'll usually pass at the end of the year, whether to inflate profits, whether to decrease profits for the purpose of income tax, whether to show lesser liabilities, whether to cut down on your current liabilities so that your net working capital is high, so that you can take additional cash credit. So when you're looking into all these book entries, all the transactions which are merely represented by book entries, check whether these transactions are prejudicial to the company's interest, which is negative, whether it is negatively impacting the company's interest in any way or not. Point number 3. In case of a company not being an investment company or banking company, so it should not be an investment company or banking company. In the case of all the other companies, check whether any assets including shares, securities, assets including shares, debentures and other securities, whether it is sold at less than purchase price. For example, you are buying shares at say when the share price is say 450 rupees and you're selling it when the share price is say 325 rupees, which means you're getting into a loss. If you're buying something and selling it at a loss, it means that either your company is in a very severe cash crisis, or it could be a case where your company is getting into some malicious or some fraudulent transactions, or something is happening which is prejudicial to the company's interest. You need to thoroughly check this. Okay, so here in this case, you please check whether it is in any way prejudicial to the company's interest, or in any way it is sold at less than the purchase price. This is the third point that you need to check. The next one, loans and advances. Whether loans and advances made by the company have been shown as deposits. So what is the difference between deposits and loans and advances? In deposits, it could be refundable or it could be non-refundable. Whereas all the loans, whatever you have given, it needs to come back. Deposits might be interest earning or it might not have an interest. Whereas loans and advances, usually you give it only at certain rate of interest. In case of interest-free loan, there are a lot of terms and conditions which are stated in Companies Act and all the other acts relating to this. So all this you need to check. In case of any loans and advances that your company has advanced, you need to check whether it is shown as deposits in the books of company. Next, personal expenses. Whether the personal expenses have been shown, have been charged to revenue account. For example, Jimmy is the director's dog or pet. Jimmy's pedigree expenses, or the director and his family going to Tirumala Tirupati, all those expenses are charged to revenue account. All this is not logical. You should not do this. Check whether these personal expenses are charged to revenue account. This is also mandated in your section 37 of your Income Tax Act 1961. You can also refer that. So wise kids will always do this. They'll refer to more than one acts. Whatever is given here, more than that, you'll try doing, which is not wrong. Next is share allotment. Whether books and documents state shares, books and documents state shares have been allocated for cash. Where your books and documents are showing that shares have been allocated for cash. First check whether cash has actually been received. If cash has not been received, check whether the position that the books are showing is right. These are the two things that you need to check with respect to share allotment. Okay, so these are the matters that you need to report under section 143. First, loans and advances. Whether loans and advances given are properly secured. In case they are properly secured, check whether it is prejudicial to the terms, interest of the company. Accounting. Transactions which are merely represented by book entries. Check whether they are prejudicial to the interest of the company. Shares and debentures. Company not being an investment company or banking company, check whether all the assets including shares, debentures or other securities, whether they have been sold at a price which is less than the purchase price. Loans and advances. Check whether loans and advances are given by the company or shown as deposits in the company's books. And personal expenses. Check whether personal expenses have been charged to revenue account. And share allotment. Check whether the books and documents where they're showing that shares have been allotted for cash, whether cash has actually been received. And in case if it has not been received, whether the position which is shown in books is correct and it is not misleading, right? So jumping on to the next question. The division of internal control into 5 components provides a useful framework for auditors to consider how different aspects of an entity's internal control may affect the audit. Mention those components of internal control. First, write the first line as it is. As I told you, these statements, these are all learned people. They make only learned proper statements. So make that statement in your answer. Then what are the 5 components? Component number 1, the control environment. So what is control environment? Control environment is a culture, is the organization culture, is the kind of communication that goes from the management to its people, to its stakeholders, to its shareholders. If the management is ethical, the people are also going to be ethical. If the management is fraudulent, the stakeholders are also going to pester the management, are also going to pressurize the management. The employees of the company are also going to think all fraudulent ways. So what is the culture? What is the attitude of the management and the people within the company? That's the control environment. The entity's risk assessment procedures. Whether the entity has defined what are all the risks of the company and what are all the different, what is the significance of each of these risks, how important is each of these risks, what are the different ways that the company is trying to address these risks. Some risks they might try to mitigate, some risks they might try to reduce, some risks they might try to avoid, some risks they might try to ignore. So what are the different ways that the organization is trying to assess and react and manage to its risks? So that is the entity's risk assessment procedure process. Once you have identified the risk assessment process, what would you do next? The control activities. These are the policies and procedures the management gives, which communicates the management's directives to the company, to the stakeholders of the company. It could be in the form of SOPs, it could be in the form of documented process narratives, it could be in the form of process understanding documents, walkthrough documents. All these are control activities. It could be the RCM, this risk control matrix of the company, even that's a control activity. So all this, why does it, I mean, the management does this to understand who is the maker of the process, who is the verifier of the process, who is the checker of the process, who is the authorizer of the process. All this is defined in the control activities. The next one, monitoring of controls. Typically, how would you monitor your controls? You would have an internal audit function, you would have a concurrent audit function, you'd have your people auditing the process on a regular basis. So how do you audit it? How do you understand whether controls are all in place? There will be a review of the IFC, of the internal financial controls. There will be a review of the RCM. The RCM would be updated on a periodic basis based on the changes in process, changes in controls. So that is monitoring of controls. The last one, the information system including related business processes relevant to financial reporting and communication. So you need to understand the ERP of the company. It could be the business ERP, it could be the accounting ERP, all the information systems. You need to understand, for example, if it is a jewelry company typically would have a business ERP to account for, to understand what is the stock in hand, to understand the sales, the customer database, the vendor database, all that would be there in the business ERP. Whereas this accounting ERP will have all the accounting entries for all the sales, all the purchases, for the stock entries, what is the movement of stock. So all that would be the inventory module of the accounting ERP would have all that. So you need to understand the information systems thoroughly, how every transaction takes place, how the transaction flows into the accounting books, how the transaction flows into the financial module, into the inventory module, into the accounting auditing module. All this you need to understand. So if you're a wise kid, you're not just going to write all this dabbas only, but you're also going to write a brief explanation for all of this processes, for all of this components. Okay. So first one is the control environment. The 5 components are: 1 is the control environment, 2 is the entity's risk assessment processes, 3 is the control activities, 4 is monitoring of controls, and 5 is the information system including entity's business process relevant to financial reporting and communication. Into the next question. Your firm has been appointed as auditor to audit the accounts of Auto Parts Manufacturer ABC Limited. Elucidate the matters to be considered by an auditor in developing his overall plan for the expected scope and conduct of audit. So what are the things that you would do, the matters that you would consider in the development of an overall audit plan? What I thought was we can compare this audit plan making versus a wedding plan. Say you are the event manager, a wedding planner. How would you plan this versus how would you plan an audit? The first step, what you do, you would first agree on the terms and conditions, on the terms of agreement with the wedding planner. The wedding planner would do this with the couple, with the families of the couple, that he would do. Similarly, being an auditor, what would you do? You would agree on the terms of the engagement and the statutory liabilities that you would have as an auditor. What would the wedding planner do next? Once after he has agreed on the terms of agreement, next one is he would understand as to what are the applicable customs, what are the applicable traditions of both the families. who are into the wedding. So similarly, what would the auditor do? Once he gets into the company, he would understand what are the legal requirements, what are the statutory requirements of that company. Being an auditor of the company, he would understand his individual legal and statutory requirements, as well as the company's different statutory requirements that the company has to follow. The third one, what would be the wedding planner's next plan? Identification of key events and programs. He would identify which are the key events, say engagement, Bharat and Sangeet, Mehndi. These are different events, and then the Muhurtam part of it, and then after the Muhurtam, whatever play activities, the events, whatever they're planning to conduct. So all that. So all these events, he would identify what are the key events which would form part of the wedding. Similarly, the auditor would identify the significant audit areas. Okay, the auditor would identify the significant audit areas which he needs to audit thoroughly. The next one, once after the events are identified, what would he do next? He would allocate, this is the time, this is a resource for each event. That's what typically the wedding planner would do. And being the auditor, what would the auditor do? He would set up materiality levels and the audit risk for each of the audit processes that he has identified, for each of the audit areas that he has identified. The next one, what is the nature and extent of information that you need to get from couple? You need to understand what are the likes and dislikes of the couple, what this guy likes more, what interests him more, what are his hobbies, what is his passion. So that information you will take it about the groom, you will take it from the bride, about the bride you will take it from the groom. All that the wedding planner would do to make the wedding more interesting. So being an auditor, what would you do? You need to understand what is the nature, timing and extent of the audit evidence to obtain. What would make sufficient and appropriate audit evidence you would assess. Next, the wedding planner would typically understand the degree of reliance that he can place on the couple's cousins and close friends for various wedding arrangements. Why on the couple's cousins and close friends? Because these are going to be the pillars of the wedding. Similarly, as an auditor, the auditor would understand the degree of reliance that he should place on the entity's internal control and the entity's accounting system, because these are going to be the pillars with respect to audit. The next, what is the extent of involvement? I mean, being the wedding planner, he needs to understand what is the extent of involvement. I need to involve the first circle relatives and friends, second circle relatives, and there's expert advice, uncles, aunties who come and advise on everything which is happening in the wedding. So what is the extent of involvement I'm going to give these people? Similarly, the auditor needs to understand what is the extent of involvement of internal auditors, of branch auditors, subsidiary auditors, and experts. What is going to be the extent of involvement? And the last point, being a wedding planner, it is going to be the nature and timing of different events and corresponding information to couple and their families. What is going to be the I'm going to tell this couple at this point that this is going to happen. I'm going to tell their families at this point that this is going to happen. This is going to be a surprise element. This is going to come at the last minute. This is going to be a front-end information. At the beginning only I'll tell. All this he needs to plan. Similarly, being an auditor, you need to plan the nature and timing of your reports and other communication that the auditor does to the management and to the different stakeholders. Okay, so now summarizing the matters to be considered in development of an overall audit plan. Point number one, first you'll agree on the terms of agreement and the statutory liabilities for you as an auditor. Two, you need to understand the various applicable legal and statutory requirements of the company being an auditor. 3, you need to identify the significant audit areas. 4, you need to determine the materiality and audit risk for each of the audit areas. 5, you need to understand the nature, timing and extent of audit evidence to be gathered. 6, you need to understand the degree of reliance you need to place on accounting system and internal financial controls of the organization, which are going to act as the pillars of the audit. Next, you're going to understand the extent of involvement, the work and the extent of involvement of internal auditors and the different component auditors, which would be branch auditors, subsidiary auditors, associate company auditors, and the experts. And finally, you're going to understand the nature and timing of the reports and other communications of the auditor to the management and to the stakeholders of the company.